This is Dave Snowden. I've got various titles ranging from Professor at a Complexity Centre to Professional Curmudgeon, and I'm not too much specialist to use. And this is the Agile Uprising podcast.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Jay Hersko. This week, we have a very special episode. We're going to be talking about, you probably have seen it if you were at Agile 2022, the Agile Kata. And who better to talk about the Agile Kata than the man, the innovator behind it himself from Incrementor, Mr. Joe Krebs. Joe, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Jay, thanks for having me. And I'm looking forward to our conversation here. This is awesome.
Likewise. So, Joe, for people who may not be familiar with you or Incrementor or your work, can you give us a little bit of a background?
Yeah, I've been around for a while in the Agile community, like the early 2000s, even before the change of the century, the use case driven development and things like that in the 1990s, and changed towards more Agile, obviously, in 2001, and did a lot of work within companies. And then in 2007, started my own company, Incrementor. And since then, I've been coaching, training on Agile processes such as Scrum, Kanban, and now more and more Agile Kata.
Awesome. So, and the Agile Kata is actually how I found you. I've been following your work for a bit.
Okay.
I got a couple. I have a poster around here somewhere, a collaboration poster. I have some stickers all over the place. And the Agile Kata, I got the poster, I got the one sheet. And then this is one of those rare practices, for me at least. A lot of guys or a lot of practitioners, they have this whole shirts and certs thing where they're rolling out giant training programs and all that. This was one of those things that I picked up, I read it, and I said, well, this kind of just makes a logical sense. And I turned and I showed it to another coach who started using it with a customer of ours, one of the business units we're working with, and the results were almost instantaneous.
That is
So and that's why I was like, I got to get Joe to talk about this, because this is one of those rare, no offense to some of the people who do the more high-minded and they want to write a 600-page book about it. There's a place for that. But This is something where I literally picked it up, understood it, ran with it, and it worked. So right. I want to start with, let's talk a little bit about where did the genesis come from, Joe? Like where did this come? How did this come to you to say, hey, this is something we could really use?
Well, so sometimes people call me like the creator or the innovator of the Agile Kata. I basically bring two camps together, right? The Agile and the Kata camp. And how it all started was actually more like in 2014. That way back when we started as Incrementor, engaging with clients on Agile transformations, and we just looked for ways of, 2014. I mean, it's hard to believe 2022 right now, right? Hard to believe, like, what were the challenges at that time? And we're like, it was Agile transformations. Well, that was a hot topic at that time, and how to do this. But the problem, and that's something we noticed, was that a lot of organizations went, through the Agile transformation in a waterfall way.
Yes.
So
yes, we are not agile about our we are not agile about our agile more often than not. Yes.
Right. Certain things like, when will this Agile transformation be over? ? Right. And so obviously we knew there had to be a better way out there. We tried several other things. We tried to use processes like Scrum for an Agile transformation, more like on a meta level. But we weren't really successful. I have to be totally honest with you. So those things worked very, very well for like team and product development, but not so much for an Agile transformation. So we will keep searching. It's like, there's got to be something out there. And I have to say, it took us a long time. We experimented. We had our own approach at that time. And then I stumbled across Mike Rother's work of the Toyota Kata. And I was like, maybe there is something to it. And I have to say, this topic, just captured me entirely. I was like, there's something really cool here, something we can use. And it's this basic pattern, as you said, like in the beginning, right? It's like this basic pattern. It just makes sense. It's like, maybe that's what it is, right? So to take, we can talk about those details a little bit if you like, but it's like to take the time boxing off, for example, right? What is in other processes, like the strict 2-week rhythms, and maybe they're not necessarily the right path to take for an Agile transformation, but still keeping the same things you would see in other empirical processes like inspection and adaptation and working in very, very small steps. And we just got drawn to this Kata thing. However, the Kata, Toyota Kata as it is comes out of manufacturing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So very successful and has been proven for decades there too, right? So Agile and Kata, both camps are, they have a history. And so we made some tweaks there too, because it had to work in an Agile environment, right? So we want to create an environment that will be Agile. We're not just going to try to improve. We want to improve into a specific direction, and that is agility. So that's where it came. And then in 2018, we formalized it. And that's something that were like the early beginnings. And at this point, we called it actually the Agile Transformation Kata. So this was the original term, because we just thought, let's use this for Agile transformations. But then we learned from people that are using this that this could be used for many, many other things. And that's when we dropped the word transformation, and I just called it Kata.
There's to your point, there is brilliance, there is elegance in the simplicity, right? And not to say that it's oversimple. It's simple in the sense of, you're right, we're not agile about our agile more often than not. We come in with a giant plan of how we're going to do the transformation, which is, that oxymoron in itself, like jumbo shrimp. But even when we start bringing up things like Scrum or like Kanban, which for us are fairly simple because we've had our heads wrapped around them long enough. If you show up in an organization, you start talking about Scrum or Kanban, it can be overwhelming. Even when you have a consultant, no offense to consultants, the consultants will show up with the safe big picture. That's kind of overwhelming. Whereas, and I'm going to put a link to the show in the show notes to the site. Joe has a poster. He has a one sheet. I use this one sheet religiously. I keep it on the side of my desk, right, where it's elegant and simple. And I actually sent it to a VP that we're working with. And I said, this is the thought process. This is the model we want to use, the pattern we want to use. And within less than a day, because it got lost in his inbox because they have so many email, he came back and he said, this makes total sense. Let's do this. Because he could understand that much simpler than, like you said, trying to explain to people a 2-week time box with planning and a retro and a demo. Not to say that those things are bad. It's just they may cognitively pollute what we're trying to accomplish. So let's walk through it, Joe. So you start with the first thought is understanding the direction or challenge. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a 4-step pattern. So I often refer to it as a pattern. Some people call it a process, but it's more like a pattern of 4 steps you can do. And the first one would be capturing the direction of where do we want to go, or the challenge we want to go. Now that is already a piece where we can get a good handle on. So that would not be, for example, we want to transform our organization towards Agile. That would be too big, right? That would be more like an overarching vision of several approaches we would take with the Kata. But the direction could be, for example, introducing an Agile process to an organization, or improve an existing process, right? So that's one of the strengths of the Agile Kata is that it can start at any given point, right? So you can, it's not like a start to end process. It's not like you have to throw away everything you're doing right now because you're switching to Agile Kata. The Agile Kata can pick you up where you are. It's just like, where are you right now? And what is your next challenge? And that challenge could be, for example, I just recently heard from somebody like conflict resolution in an organization, right? There's a lot of conflict. And
really?
Yeah. So they wanted to use that as a challenge, but it could be also like typical Agile transformation, introducing an Agile process to a team. And that could be a direction to possibly, on a maturity chart, take a team from a 1 level to the next level, something like that. So you can get a handle on it. It's not like a vision for the next 3 years. It is something that is possibly doable within a 4-6 months time frame. And that's where you would start with getting direction. So some people have that visionary step in the beginning and say, what is the overarching thing? But the Agile Kata would not need that. So this would start with the challenge, step number 1.
What is the problem directly in front of me? What am I trying to get around? Exactly. And you just, one of the lines you just dropped, which I wrote down, was, it's not just about transformation, but it's also about improvement. Yes. So like you said, you don't need some grand plan. You could start with what is the barrier currently in front of me? And then how can I envision around it? So bootstrapping off that, once I understand my challenge, I understand that barrier I'm trying to get around the way I want to go. My next step is, I call this the reality step. So where are we currently, right? And you call it grasping the current condition. So am I to understand, Joe, that's really about, creating almost the mental model of the delta to say, here's what's in my way and where I want to go, but here's where I am now, right? Is it almost like snapping a line, so to speak?
Yeah. And Jay, this is the most important step, in my opinion. There are so many folks out there in agile transformations. They are being tasked, either consultants or internal coaches, is that we're going to do an agile transformation and we're going to go forward and we have these recipes, right? And we're going to get started with working. And it is a good mindset to get on problems and solving these problems. But it's that very important step in this kata is to say, first, step back and see where you are before you jump to conclusions, right? I don't know how many listeners right now would say, well, our agile transformation was successful, let's say, or, we had some obstacles, but overarchingly it was a good investment. And we would say, why? And there would be no answer to that, right? It's like, I can't quantify it. And that's what the current condition actually is. You're going back and you're saying, like, what is really, where are you? Where do I pick you up? Are you brand new to this? Are you already 2 years in? But what is your current condition? Where are you in, obviously, in relation to the direction we want to take, right? So we're assessing ourselves, and that is a very important step. And I gave a talk, I call it like, don't cut our corners, right? Like a little play, right? So that's my thing. It's like, don't cut that corner, right? So don't jump right into and do things. Step back and assess where you are. And we call that like assessing the current condition. And that's an important step in terms of agility. Where are we? Possibly reflecting on the Agile Manifesto and say, like, where are we really in terms of agility? And how do we possibly quantify that and say, like, we are X, Y, Z. We have a number next to it. And that is an important step, because only then you can later down the road in 6, 12, 18 months, you can say, we have pushed the needle. We have changed the way of how this organization has worked. We have increased in parallel, maybe profitable, right? An organization that has increased revenue through an agile transformation, for example. There's hard data, but that requires a team to step back first.
And now I understand, after you've fleshed out a bit, why this truly is the most important step, in the sense of you need to be honest with yourself, right? You need to, I mean, the quote that I stole it from, I think I stole it from the professional agile leader. There was in the narrative, they say facts are friendly. And this is where I think you just reiterated it to me, that if you're not truthful with yourself about where you currently are in relation to where you want to go and what that challenge is, you're going to end up going down a path where you could waste time, you could waste money, you could waste time and money. And at the end of all that stress and that sweat and hard work, you may actually end up worse off than you were. Right.
Exactly. And that's also a finding, right? We can even like fail fast. We often talk about that in product development. It's also for process development. That's another thing. I do want to say, though, even though I said that it is an important step, right? All four are important, but this one, I think we have the most opportunity for learning and transformational work, in team development, in improvement ideas, and so on. This is just based on my experience. I've seen so many coaches jump right in and go into solution finding rather than first looking at it where we are.
Do you think that also, Joe, is that also a side effect of the way our industry is perceived, where, I pay what, big vendor X a not insignificant amount of money to hire a coach, and I want the coach to come in and that terrible term, air quotes, hit the ground running, right? Where we know that after doing what we do, you gotta spend some cycles to understand the rhythms, like what amounts to is the circadian rhythm of the organization, and how information flows through your informal networks and how things get done. And it's almost a challenge to the leaders that we're working with you got to give me a beat here. So I can get my feet below me and truly grasp the current condition, because otherwise I'm going to run forward. And I think this is where some of us have experienced failure. We run forward trying to apply a pattern that we learned in a previous example. And while on the greater scheme of things, these things are all stochastic at the level that we're working at, they're not all the same. And we need to take that beat and that breath to understand, but yet we're kind of being forced not to.
That's right. And it doesn't have to be a very lengthy activity either, right? I don't want to scare anybody here in lengthy assessments or anything like that. It could be a simple data point, like how often do we release our product per year or something like that, or per month, or whatever data point is, and how can we, if that is a concern of an organization, how can we increase that, right? So you could look back 12 months into your coaching of on an organization, or let's say as an enterprise coach, you can look back and say, through the work we have done using the Kata, we have increased release cycles by 200% or something like that. And now all of a sudden you have something you can attach value to your work you have done within an organization. I'm not saying to justify your work, but it's just like to say like the agile has a benefit for this organization. And the reason of going more and more into that direction has continuously that kind of benefit. So that's an important step. So don't cut our corners, right?
I'm definitely going to use that, and I'm going to introduce that in the conversations I have about this. Yeah. So we've talked about, we understand the direction, the challenge you're trying to go into. Then we're grasping where we are currently. We're being real with ourselves. We're being honest. Here's where I am. Next, we establish the target condition.
That's right.
And let's talk a little bit more about that. How should we think about that target condition? Is there like a heuristic about, how far out, how far in, long, short, size? What do you think, Joe? What have you seen work, and what would you suggest?
Yeah. So there was another appealing thing when I first read about the Kata, right? So when I came across this thinking, I was like, there's something to that, especially from an organizational perspective. The target condition should be short, right? It should be something a team could be working on a week or two, but it's not a sprint, right? So, and what that does to a team that might not be fully dedicated, right? We're talking about business agility. We're talking about organizational change. You might not have HR people 100% dedicated to this like you would have with Scrum teams, right? So, however, you want to move something forward using the Kata, and people are coming together, but that's just not full time, 100% of their time. But what this target condition does is, because there is a lack of a sprint boundary or an iteration, to make this a little bit more neutral, is there is the goal is to reach that target condition in a good quality, whatever that team thinks, in the shortest possible time. So nobody says you have 2 weeks time to do this, right? It's not within a time box. This is like, let's go after that and figure out, does that seem to be reasonable to be accomplished within a week or two? And if that's the case, that is a target condition. And then we say, let's go after that. So each target conditions, TC, goes towards the direction we have. That's the step number one, right? So we need several target conditions to make our way towards that challenge we have initially identified. So there's definitely some stepping stones. We're not going to achieve the challenge within one thing that then the direction was too small.
Right. And I like how you just said, you don't necessarily need to think in terms of a iteration or a sprint or a time box. It really is how far out can we make this where it's aspirational, but how close in is it that we can actually get the learning and reflect on that learning and then update where we go next.
Exactly, right? So, and then once we have defined that, right, and maybe that is a data point that relates to the current condition, where we say like, okay, current condition, we are here. Target condition, we want to be ideally there within a very short period of time. And now comes step number 4, right? Experimenting. And so that's also very different. It's like the team is now in a fully self-organized way, right? So they are like, we're experimenting. How do we get to this target condition from where we are right now? And that's really scientific thinking, if you think about that, right? So you have a hypothesis, you're thinking about how to achieve this, and now you're planning your experiment or experiments if you need several ones, and maybe one experiment fails to try something else. But the goal is always that target condition. And once you reach that, you go back and you have a new current condition because you just reached that.
Right. It feeds back into itself. And to your point about the whole not being agile by agile, or being agile by a plan. At no point when you build that plan do you build in that feedback loop. Peter Mellor calls it the whole triple loop learning thing. What does the team learn? What does the program learn? And what do we learn overall?
Exactly.
Your direction, challenge, and current condition change with every experiment because you have shifted in a different direction, not necessarily good or bad, right? But just a direction. So you need to reassess.
That's right. Exactly. And so sometimes I hear people, isn't that just like a PDCA kind of a cycle? Well, that would be just the step 4 because we're iterating, right?
Right. The action.
Planning, doing, checking, acting, so on, right? So we keep going in those cycles. So, and once we started using that pattern with organizations, we already realized that there is something, an agile transformation could be very huge for some organizations, right? An overwhelming task. So what we found is that breaking things down into these directions, working in these very small steps, sometimes baby steps, right? But at least we're going to kick things off and we're going to start walking towards what we're trying to achieve. And the Kata provides super fantastic guidance. And that's why it's where we're so thrilled. So we've been doing this, right? Just to come back to the incremental beginning and since 2018. And then in 22, we decided to share it with the world. We basically said, here's the Agile Kata for everyone to use. We made it available as a share-alike license. We're still shipping those posters. We often get requests for people, can you just make it a download? And we're like, we want this to be hung up.
Tactile. There's something to be said about it being tactile and having it in your hands, that the more virtual we get, the more we kind of forget what it's like to. That's the best part, man. I love going to the mailbox, mainly because I buy too much shit from Amazon, but that's a different conversation. But the whole idea of, oh, look, another book is here. Like that's the coolest part. And I love how you do that. And I got one of the stickers over here. I think this is one of them. Yep. I got them sitting around on my desk. I hold them up in meetings all the time. Again, that tactile nature. To your point about, well, isn't it just PDCA? When I was looking at this, and I just recently finished David Marquet's Leadership as Language, where he talks about the idea of red work and blue work. So blue work is your thinking, your thought, your reflection. Your red work is the actual doing. When we typically look at a transformation, we spend a lot of time doing the blue work, but then it's all red. This process is a healthy balance between blue and red, where you think you do, you think you do, you think you do, which in Marquet's book, he actually says that is the path to success. Mm-hmm. It's the constant cycling back and forth. Because if you do too much blue, you're in analysis paralysis. If you do too much red, you're just running forward without even, solipsistically looking forward and saying, not even being aware of what's going on in the fringes. So that was the balance that I was like, that makes sense in view of this, because it forces us to not get too far one way without taking the pause to say, okay, where do we sit now? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, definitely. So there's a great balance. We could say the first three steps are planning activities within the kata, right? So we could say, what's the direction, what's the current condition, what's the target condition? So it's reflection on yourself, and it's like, what is it we want to achieve? So it feels like 3 out of 4 steps is related to organizing yourself. However, these are very short in terms of time, mm-hmm. right? So these are very focused, short kind of activities, whereas the experimenting step 4 is the lengthiest in the timeline. So I think there's a healthy balance, as you say, to this pattern. It's common sense. It just makes it just clicked when we saw it, and we said we have to explore that further. So it's out there. I can only invite everybody to go to agilekata.org, and there are people who have reached out to me and says, this is so cool, I want to translate this for you. Is that okay? So now I think it's I don't know the exact number, 6-7 languages already.
That's great.
It's awesome, right? So I have to publish one soon. There's another one ready, so we're going to put them out, because people are actually just like you, right, interested in how do we broadcast this message to other people, and in this particular case, to people who would like to read this in a different language. So I'm thrilled about that. And also,
that's great to hear.
Yeah, and we also now this is the free, everybody can try, read up on it, smart up on it, give it a shot kind of approach. So this is the share alike, is agilekata.org. And what we're now creating for 23 is more like an assessment kind of Agile Kata Pro. That's agilekata.pro program, where people can actually take a course in this, and with other instructors. So this is not me only, with other instructors delivering this around the world. So there are several trainers lined up, and they're ready to get started in 23. And just to bring this through exercises, examples, and use cases to people. And the use cases are different, right? So we're going to go into different areas in an organization. So how do I use it on a team? How do I use it to increase business agility? How do I use it for agile transformations? And then after that, we'll assess and then give people a certificate where they can say, you know what, I know something about this and I would like to try that. So I'm not, it's not just like reading up on it. So we invite people to go to either side of the think there is a commercial aspect to it. It courses, material, instructors, but there's also something where people can just smart up as they wish on their own.
That you provided the perfect segue, because that was one of the things I wanted to ask. I've noticed the emails have changed and they're coming out more frequently. You've got this more managed. Some people learn better in that rigid kind of classroom state. I mean, not everybody can pick up a book and read it and say, okay, I grokked it, we're good, let's go. And I was really kind of geeked about that. And I actually sat around the office to say, hey, some of you maybe we think about doing this together, because this might be a good way for us to kind of circumvent some of the built-in complexity we've inadvertently introduced. And for our listeners, I'll give a textbook example of how we actually use this. This is a real life example.
That's awesome.
So where I'm working with one of my business partners has somewhere between 5 and 8 teams all working together. Not necessarily a safe train per se, but they're all kind of working together. And we have a coach working with them. We have a quasi RTE. Each team is a scrum master. They're all scrum teams. And there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences. And as a leadership team, we've been looking at how do we start to introduce the idea of change and start making little changes where we don't know exactly where we want to be, but we know that where we are now is not optimal. So what we did is we did a whole exercise in Miro where we threw a bunch of ideas out. These are things we could do. And each one got boiled down into an experiment. Maybe the experiment was having product owners with direct support from BAs on the technology side, because it's a lot of data in AI and ML, which is very complicated. We had another experiment of, well, how do we get rid of our scrum of scrums and make it turn into a more collaborative conversation around impediments and dependency? And each one of those formed a swim lane, which we then built a kata on top of. But we didn't build it. The coach didn't build it. The scrum masters didn't build it. The team built it themselves with the leaders. And then we said, okay, well, here's what we've got. Here's what we've identified. I think there was like 5 or 6 swim lanes. And then we said, which one do we want to tackle first?
Right.
And then it was the leaders said, oh, well, let's hit this one. This seems like low hanging fruit. We can knock this out, know if it makes sense. And then while we're learning from it, we can go on to something else. And for everybody listening, the response has been great. We have literally, I think it's every 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something. We literally bring up the board. And we say, okay, how are all these things going? Oh, well, we've run this one. And then in the time between the last meeting and this meeting, we ran another one, and now we've landed here. So we're consistently reevaluating that direction. We're consistently reevaluating where we've landed. And as far as real life applicability, literally we do it in a PowerPoint slide, and the conversations that come out of just reacting to what we said, you can't script those sort of things. It just organically happens. And now you have the people who you're trying to get to quote unquote change. They're literally pulling the results forward because they're seeing the progress, and okay, well, here's our next target. Here's our next target. It's kind of wild. It kind of makes your life easier too.
Yeah. The interesting thing, Jay, is what I'm hearing is also like people are volunteering for things, right? So it's like, they're not necessarily planned for. So very natural things like, hey, I got an hour right now. I'm going to focus on something, right? And here's an item I can work on. So self-organization, self-management, really is being even promoted even more so, right? Than it's being like in other processes, right? Because it's like, it's just an experiment. Let's try something. And what is the outcome? Did we achieve it? No. What else could we do, right? And so it pushes the problem or the challenge back to the team. It's like, how do we solve this? And it took the time box off. So for cultural change, for organizational change, that is a wonderful pattern to use. Now, there are some teams that are using this now as a team process, right? Or pattern to actually use it instead of other processes. But again, your story right now, this is just compelling, right? When people are trying this, and that's the feedback we're hearing from folks out there, is like, I've tried this here, I've tried this there, and it's working, right? I mean, it just proves the point that the pattern is rock solid, and that's why I'm happy to bring it back to the world and say, like, try it, give it a shot. There is, what's the worst thing that can happen if you're trying this, right? It's you're losing possibly a short cycle. You're learning something, and it might not fit your culture. That's one thing, but the feedback we're getting is extremely positive.
It's great. It's great, and like you said, a big part of it, a big part of the part that ended in a place that we were all quite surprised was the idea of the push versus pull. And I think it was Peter Drucker said, it's not that people hate change, they hate when change is done to them. When we introduced this thing, we did find people coming out of the woodwork to volunteer, to say, hey, that experiment we want to run, that improvement kata around the the portfolio process, the portfolio Kanban, where we can't visualize our work. I'll take that because I'm really close to the tool. And there were people coming out of the woodwork and not only offering to pick up parts of it, but they were offering a new perspective. They were putting feedback back into the system of, hey, did you all know that why we think it goes from A to B, it actually goes from A to F and then back to B? Those type of insights you can't put money on, because that's just knowledge that someone's paying back. That's, maybe we really need to re-grasp our current condition because what we thought was an assumption really is kind of off. It's been really interesting to say, and I don't want to jinx it and hope it goes off the rails, but it really has been cool to watch things progress in a way where people are grabbing and going.
Right. So what we did, Jay, and this is really cool, right? That you're mentioning this in terms of the cultural differences. The original Toyota Kata out of manufacturing is exactly that kind of core thing we talked about 1, 2, 3, 4 before. But what we want to make sure is with the Agile Kata is that we're going to take it one step ahead, right? We want to make sure that we're going into an agile direction. So our reflection should be always applying the Kata through the eyes of agile, because that's really that gives us the overarching direction. So we always include, like, for example, liberating structures, right? We use an open space as group work to find out what is the direction, right? A perfect tool to be used within that context is to possibly run an open space event, right? Or it brings the power out. It's like that gives us a direction. It gives us a shared vision because we're all in a room together and we're all working on this topic together. And then I'm not saying you have to do open space every day, but that would be a great
way to start. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
And if you're using this Kata this way and you're enriching it, let's say with agile techniques and tools, for example, liberating structures, just one of them, people notice instantly there's change. This is a different meeting we're doing here right now, right? This feels different. We have not done this before, right? And it feels powerful, right? So the cultural change happens while the Kata is being executed, not as a result of it. That is always what I say. Like I said, if you're going through an agile transformation, you're expecting the agile transformation to turn you into an agile organization. But that might be months and months of working until you see the benefits. We want to make sure the techniques being applied during the Kata and create that culture already while we're doing this, right? So pairing, mobbing, open space, all great techniques, lean coffees, like bringing the techniques in, right? To facilitate that kind of process. Also, to work as an agile coach using the Kata. Obviously, you have to understand the pattern of the Kata and what it can do for you, right? So the role of an agile coach might get bigger and more enriched, right? Because how do I work with a team that is going through a Kata? Beautiful stuff.
It's fantastic. It's fantastic. I can't think of a better note to end on than that. So Joe, if people want more information, obviously I'm going to link to your sites in the show notes. If people want more information, they want to get in contact with you, they want to look at some of these courses that you're going to be offering, where do they go?
For the courses, the best way to go is agilekata.pro. That's Agile Kata Professional. There is courses. It's a one-day course right now. So it's a one-day course. And that course is for level 1s getting started. It should be a short course because the topic, we want people to get started with this. There is agilekata.org. That is the nonprofit site, so to speak, where we're sharing white papers, the white paper of the Agile Kata, so people can just read up on it and try it. That's one way. And then obviously they can reach out to me via email. That is jkrebs@incremento.com. But we are taking everything, even this poster you have and this card, we're taking that card and poster and move over the next weeks and months. We're going to move all that white labeled over to agilekata.pro. We want that separated from Incremento. We're just one of the training companies that are providing this. And we want to really create a culture of Agile Kata at agilekata.pro.
All right. That sounds fantastic. So once again, Joe, I want to thank you for taking the time this morning to sit down with me. This has been a great way to start my day. I will tell you that much. Usually it's a status meeting and I want to drive nails in my eyes. On behalf of Joe and myself, I want to thank all of you listeners for tuning in once again. Please find us on Discord, hop in the conversation. There's an active conversation around this, liberating structures, open space. Joe basically hit for the cycle. We're all chatting about these things. So please hop in and get in on the conversation. Shout out to Krebs and Machine Man for our free outro music update, outro royalty free. And once again, tune in next week for another episode. And until next time, this is the Agile Uprising podcast signing out.
To celebrate Slider Sunday all season long, King's Hawaiian is giving away $1 million in a trip to the big game to one lucky winner. Just go to kingshawaiianshowdown.com to enter to win. Earn more entries by playing fun games, voting on your favorite sliders, and discovering delicious game day recipes. That's kingshawaiianshowdown.com for your chance to win $1 million. kingshawaiianshowdown.com.